Hello viewers, we all are living in very interesting times, and this is the British interesting because it is very unpredictable. And we all understand transformation is all around all of us. Our lives are getting transformed even without us realizing. It's interesting because at the center of this entire transformation is how work in itself, workplace and workforces are getting transformed. And to discuss this further, it's an absolute pleasure for me to actually have my fellow partner colleague from the US, Bhushan Sethi. Bhushan has a very interesting background. Now, this is not the British English. This is Bhushan, who is Indian national, born and raised in the UK and living for last 20 plus years in the US. So, truly a global national with us, and absolute pleasure to actually have you in India. And I know, Bhushan, in your growing up years, you did spend some time coming to India. How different is it for you when you see it today?
Thanks, Chaitali. Delighted to be back here. First time in Delhi since the pandemic. It's changed so much, obviously. Infrastructure, buildings, the country's completely wired. We still have challenges around things like pollution and travel and how do we get more females in the workplace. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those, but it's a pleasure to be back. It's always a real honor to be in a place where your parents were born and raised.
Sure, Bhushan. And at this point in time, everybody is actually on a high tide, should I say, when it comes to Indian talent. But I'm going to keep that aside, and I'm going to ask you, Bhushan, as the global leader, co-leader for people and organization practice, you have actually seen the importance of people and organization really evolve over the years. When you think of the future, the next 8-10 years, what role do you think people and organization is going to play in success of organizations?
How people and organizations evolved over time is simply, leaders have always told us that people are their most important asset. The pandemic and what we're seeing right now as companies need to grow and transform, people are their most important asset in terms of access to specialist talent, the people that need to drive the creativity to innovate. We see it across all sectors. Mm-hmm. The challenge we have now as a set of business leaders is this economic downturn. We cannot go back to the old ways of working. We cannot go back to the old way of cost cutting and not think about the humanity associated with business. That's our collective responsibility. We want to be purpose driven. It's also our collective challenge because we know we do still run business by looking at financial metrics first, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
In fact, quite interesting you say that, Bhushan, because in India, the realization of talent being right at the center of success was there. I think there was cognizance of it, but the realization has actually come at a completely different level in the last 2.5 years. Yet, when it comes to running businesses, organizations, particularly I would say the CXOs, are wanting to take the world back to normal. And the definition of normal is the normal that existed before COVID, which is, can we have people back to workplaces? Can we just have things the way it was earlier? The reality is everything has changed. The minds of the human have changed a little, and the talent which is center of that mind of the human has changed quite a bit. How are you seeing this play out in your part of the world?
Well, those worker preferences, as you described, seem to be the same in many organizations and many economies where specialist talent have choices. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to go back to the old way of working. They don't want to work 5 days a week if they don't have to in the office. They want to work on work that's meaningful, that's purposeful for them. They want to work in a good environment. They want to work with good, progressive, inclusive leaders. And we know that there is a bunch of other folks in the workforce that don't have that degree of empowerment and don't have that agency. We need to make sure we're bringing them along, and we need bringing them into the workforce. And I'm especially thinking about female representation or underrepresented minorities, whatever they look like in different parts of the world. But we've got to really understand that specialist talent, they still have many, many choices, even in an economic downturn. And so organizations will be loath to kind of make those decisions to go back to the old way, or they will lose their talent.
Quite interesting. So, Bhushan, one of the things that I am actually definitely seeing with clients in India is the fact that there's this massive cry for skills and talent, and I'm calling it out separately because talent is what I have in hand and what I'm doing with them or who are in the pipe. skills is I have an outstanding strategy laid out. I have identified opportunities. There's no dearth of money yet, because we are yet not talking downturn the way the Western world, of course, is talking. But there will be ripple effect is my worry. But the skills to deliver on some of those strategies is very different from the skills that existed or exist in the organizations today. The challenge for organizations is, do I get newer set of people to learn those skills and get them as ready inside the organizational setup, or I work with my existing talent? What are you seeing about something like this all over the world?
Well, what we're seeing is that you can't hire enough talent. There isn't enough specialist skills in say cyber or engineering, or people who can actually reimagine complete value chains and business models. If you think about infrastructure or energy, think about the ESG environment. We haven't even started talking about human leadership skills, which are now much more pivotal and important to a company's strategy. So this upskilling agenda and bringing in people from different backgrounds and coaching on the job and training and taking risks on people and getting more people into the workforce that have been kind of sitting out on the sidelines, and especially in the US, where we see labor force participation still stubbornly in its low 60s in terms of percentage. We see that around the world, and I'm sure that's similar in India. We've got to bring more people into the workforce.
So quite interestingly, Bhushan, one conversation that has picked up a little more than what was happening maybe 2-3 years back is the conversation with large conglomerates around academies. And these academies are not just leadership, but they are skills academies. They are very focused on building talent and building futuristic skills that may not be existing in the market, but they want to go young. They want to go literally into educational institutes, hire, train, and then deploy. It's a sentiment of having to build your own talent. Like we said, build your own inventory in the past. It's about building your own talent for the next 8 to 10 years. When you see something like this, what's your view for a country like India or leaders who are taking some of these decisions? What works in an academy?
As you start building academies, really getting people to credentialize kind of skills that they can immediately apply in the workplace, engineering skills, ESG skills, skills around kind of hard infrastructure, energy, supply chain, so important. The more that you can actually create credentials that are portable across companies, across industries, that is going to be incredibly differentiating for a country, an economy, and certain companies. It also starts to challenge some of our focus on higher education. And we're seeing this around the world, even in our own firm, where we're bringing in people in places like the UK without undergraduate degrees. In the US, we're hiring more from different types of colleges and different kinds of backgrounds. So I think what we're describing is ready-made skills that we can apply on the job, and it's not all going to come from higher education.
Fascinating. I think this is such a fascinating one. So we are saying don't hire for degrees, hire for skills and build those skills as you go. Very, very fascinating. You spoke about environment and coming to ESG. We in India are definitely seeing the next 10 to 15 years being infrastructure and energy-led growth beyond tech, because technology, climate tech and all of that investment is there. But when you think of environment and climate, what repercussion do you think that could have on people and organization strategies for clients?
One of the first things we have to do around ESG is depoliticize it. It's too polarizing in different countries and different organizations. The more we can also raise the general acumen of what does it mean to decarbonize the supply chain? What does it mean to understand who your vendors are and what their commitments are around these topics? How do we actually bring more diverse perspectives and representation into the workforce? And what we also need to do is to say, where does it make sustainable economic and business sense? And we actually change the mindset of business and consumers in their daily behaviors.
So quite fascinating again this one, because Bhushan, what I am taking away is to make ESG successful for organizations, it's necessary to have a great strategy and have the focus, but it's not enough. Appreciation of what ESG could mean is in the micro decisions which employees actually take. So that whole acumen building and appreciation for that has to go right up to the grassroots. Second, one of the things that I'm realizing is, again, the impact of ESG is not just what my employees do, it's my entire value chain, my entire ecosystem, my suppliers, my partners, everyone, because all of them are adding or taking away from my carbon equation, isn't it? So how do I, when I think ESG as an organization, think of the whole value system and be a little selfless about it? Because if they all grow, it's like that value chain. So, and that's going to take a little bit of time. And third, the point that you made, I really think it's very important to depoliticize it, because sometimes it just makes complete sense for the whole thinking to come up and people to realize the greater good opportunity. And I think that could mean a lot of it. How do you think organizations are embracing it? Because when I speak to clients, everybody is talking a lot about it. They're talking about governance mechanisms. But if you had to pick up one specific step that they should do in addition to governance, what would that be?
Around ESG, we need to bring in the unheard voices. So who is not actually at the table worrying about the just transition? Do we have people who are working in fossil fuel-based industries, carbon-intensive industries that are uncertain about their economic security from a business perspective? Or they're a small business that is so reliant on that revenue, or they're an employee that is drilling on an oil rig and needs to understand, how do I learn about alternative fuel sources? How do I learn about solar? Will my company actually support me in that transition? And so really bringing in those unheard voices. We've seen this, whether it's ESG, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's other social issues that we have around the world. If we don't bring in the unheard voices, we're going to have huge challenges and increased polarization in business and in society.
Quite interesting. So it's awareness and capability, because when both of these things will happen simultaneously across the value chain, that's when true movement will happen. Now shifting a little bit around the whole conversation of workforce and workplace transformation. If you had to imagine, say 2040 and think of workplace of the future, what are the top 2 or 3 characteristics that comes to your mind of how the workplace could possibly look?
I would say the workplaces in the future will be much more multi-employer models. So there could be people that we take in from college, we take people from advanced degrees, we could be bringing people back into the workforce in their 70s and 80s. There could be myriads of different service providers and contractors. So multi-generation and multi-sourced workforces. And then the other piece is it's going to look different in different sectors. We're still going to have some really important hard trade skills. We talked about infrastructure. That's going to be really important. Service-based economies are obviously going to be much more digital, and whether it's the metaverse, whether it's digital payments, whether it's technology that we haven't yet imagined, we're all going to be, every industry is going to be digitized, and service industries are going to be kind of similar there. So when I think about the workplace of the future, I think it's going to be much more multi-generational, much more multi-sourced, and many industries are going to be heavily digitized, but we're still going to have to focus on some of those hard skills, whether you think about construction, infrastructure, trade skills. And so it's going to be an important challenge for both educators, government, and business leaders to bring all of this talent and this different set of preferences and digitized businesses together. What are your thoughts?
So I think 2 things. I feel the workplace of the future will be of, by, and for the workforce. So I very strongly believe that workforces will make the choices. Today we turn up to campuses, or we do hiring. The organization has a say to make the choice. Looking at the way skills are taking precedence, I believe by the timeline that I was talking about, it's going to be the workers' market. What that could also result in is exactly what you said. The workforce models will be very different from what it is today, because we'll all gun for the same talent, and the talent will make the choice whether it wants to work with 1, 2, or many organizations. Today, contractually, our workplaces are designed for workforces to work at a certain place. But if I bring that skill to the table and multiple people can benefit and the skill is not readily available, I would want to make that choice, and the ecosystem will actually make the choice to make it an open marketplace. So I think that to me is one very big one. The second, I don't know, but I do believe that technology will change the partnership between the worker and the work organization. So the net result is all of us will, regardless of who we are, will have our assistants who are technologically enabled. So there will be more work that workers will be able to do, which could drive much higher flexibility. Now it all depends upon whether organizations look at it in that motion. Imagine you have 5 assistants who are all technologically enabled. They'll take away parts of what you're doing today that could change the degree of value addition that you could possibly do, and same for me. And I think that could be a massive, massive opportunity. So we could be working 12 hours, but in those 12 hours, we could be doing much more, provided technology actually enables us in that format. The dependence on technology picking up those pieces is going to be huge. And I think the third, I hope for it, let's put it that way, is organizations, the structures will actually become softer, which will take away hierarchies. Talent models will actually become softer, and precedence will be given to knowledge and skills over experience, because the nature of problems that we might perhaps be solving will be so different. I'm hoping that even a freshman out of college, or no freshman out of college, just because of the way they look at that problem, they'll solve it very differently.
So what you're describing might sound utopian in terms of the power to the employee, open marketplace, flatter, softer structures, but some organizations are trying to move there now. We see talent marketplaces being set up in places like technology functions in lots of companies. We see the power has definitely shifted to specialist talent through the pandemic. And many organizations are looking at how they make decisions and looking at kind of the complexity of their operating models. So it's very interesting.
In fact, you're right, Bhushan. Some of what I just said, parts of it, some organizations are already imagining. And they're not just imagining, they're trying to make it happen, which basically means someone somewhere is actually thinking of these in parts, and as an ecosystem, they will come as a whole, which will completely challenge, the normal thinking, which was the normal being from the past.
And what's interesting in those models is we're going to have to reward people differently.
Absolutely.
You get rewarded for the value you create, and you could have multiple employers or sources of kind of revenue, sources of income. So fascinating complexity for lots of organizations to think through.
So Bhushan, I have to ask you this. The Indian talent in the last 1 decade particularly has been doing exceedingly well worldwide. You name it, in the industry, in the sector, even now in government positions, they are actually doing really well. What do you think this Indian talent is bringing to the table uniquely that we should absolutely retain as the next generation workforce in India?
I think about this question a lot. I wonder why we have so many Indian CEOs now. And like you say, we have people of Indian origin running countries. There's something about the attitude, the curiosity, the thirst for learning, in many cases the humility that has served those individuals incredibly well. And what I think about a lot is I worry whether it's the Indian diaspora growing up in a more privileged background outside India, or some of the kind of Indian kind of workforce here, if we're actually sharing that story enough and creating that same level of behavioral attributes with today's workforce. I'd be curious your thoughts there.
I think what you're saying is quite fascinating, Bhushan, because at the end of the day, the hunger, the curiosity, and hard work never goes out of fashion. So I think these 3 things, they more than compensate for your acumen. And very strongly, I believe the future is going to be about skills that are yet to be developed. If these 3 things, hunger to excel, curiosity to learn, and desire to work harder, I always say harder, if these 3 as a combination are kept intact, no skill will actually be a bottleneck for our talent, provided our talent appreciates and understands the importance of this. That's going to be a very important priority, I believe. We as parents, and I as a young parent, I often think, are we making our children just feel too relaxed about what's coming their way? Because being at the right place at the right time is something, but these three things will always get you ahead. And I think that's what you also mentioned.
Yeah, and the ability to collaborate with other parts of an ecosystem and other countries. People of Indian origin have been so outward and so open to ideas. We see it in entertainment, in sport, in business, in society. And so there's something there about collaborating with people from everywhere in different sectors and within the country and outside the country.
Great fourth edition. Ability to think of success as a whole and look at others playing a part. Beautiful. Thank you so much on that one, Bhushan.
Absolutely.
So maybe my last question. What does the talent need to do to keep itself relevant?
The world now realizes that people are so important. We haven't talked enough about inclusive leadership, but the importance for compassionate leadership, values-driven leaders that can bring people along, manage an ecosystem of talent that doesn't formally all report to you or even sit in your organization is going to be so important. So talent needs to continue to kind of think about purpose and meaningful work, needs to think about developing good relationships with colleagues and members in different parts of their value chain. And that talent that is in the privilege of being in leadership or influencing positions need to remember that it's not going back to the old model of leadership, it's going back into something that's new and inspirational and inclusive if we are going to get to this utopian workplace that you described.
Super. Such a pleasure having you, Bhushan. Always fascinating conversation with you, always. And the fact that you bring the perspective from so many parts of the world always makes it special. Thank you so much.
Thank you.